continuing our conversation, is Nakobe Dean, is he putting himself potentially in a position by coming to the Tide to be one of the people that will be a part of the conversation of the best in the Saban era when it comes to linebackers? There's not as many as you might think, but there's been some really, really good ones at Alabama. You got Dante Hightower. You have Rolando Mcclain. You got C.J. Mosley, Reuben Foster, Ragland. I mean, excuse me. And the list could go on. But those guys getting a majority of the votes. James, in your opinion, what's your two? What's your two?
I got to put Rolando Mcclain in there, first off, from that 2009 team. This is where it gets very difficult. Trying to pick two out of numerous inside linebackers. So, in your opinion, Rolando's clearly the best. I would put him, yes. Okay. Yes, and then just for a second one, I'm going to put C.J. Mosley in there just because his durability, his consistency, as far as making really an impact for 4 years, but. I mean, you could go Dante Hightower, you could go Reggie Ragland, and you couldn't go wrong with me on that. That's pretty tough. Yeah, I mean, like I said, you got Reuben Foster and, Dante Hightower. I think Dante Hightower gets more love because of what he's done at the NFL. He was really good. Please don't misunderstand. And I think had he not had that blown knee early in his career, he was on track to being he was already a beast, but he was definitely on his way to being a great. But let's look at kind of you mentioned Rolando. Let's look at Rolando Mcclain. First year he played in 13 games. 2007, 2008, and 2009 he played in a total of 14 games. He had a career total of 139 solo tackles, James, and 135 assists. So in 3 seasons, he had 274 tackles. And that, when you look at some of these other schools, that doesn't seem like that big a deal. And I'll probably say this every time I talk about the guys and their tackles. It's tough to lead. It's tough to have a lot more tackles when your teams are number one in defense. Okay? And I don't know. I didn't even go back and check how the 7, 8, and 9 defense ranked, but I know the 8 and 9 defense ranked in the top in terms of the country. And go back and look at the percentages. I hear guys going, well, the Alabama linebackers, they shouldn't win the Butkus Award. They shouldn't win these awards because they only have 80 tackles or they only have 70. Well, they only have that many because they had 80% of the opponent's drives are 3 and outs. They're over the course of a year. We got to make up somehow for Nick Saban not winning the Bear Bryant Award while at Alabama.
Well, I mean, the crazy part is when people look at the statistics, they don't look at the team they're on. I mean, if you play at Vanderbilt, you should have more tackles as an inside linebacker than the guy at Alabama. Alabama's the number one defense, has the most 3 and outs every year, year in and year out. So those guys don't get the opportunity. But what I like about this, James, is he was almost 139 to 135. You know what that tells you about a player? Not only do they make the plays when they're the lead dog, but that they're hustling to the ball. He has almost the exact same number of assists as he does solo tackles. He had 31 and a half tackles for a loss, 8 sacks. And back in that era when he was coming along, you didn't blitz the inside linebackers as much as I think they blitz the guys now. He had 5 interceptions and 73 yards on those returns, and he had 1 TD off of a fumble, so a 4-yard TD run. So, when you look at this guy, when he came here, he was the prototypical inside linebacker, and he was dominant. I mean, he was a first-round pick, number 8 overall by the Oakland Raiders, but the guy, I don't even know his exact stats. They're 6'5", 255, 260 pounds, could run all over the field. But, James, I'm not sure he's my number one guy. I mean, he was as dominant a middle linebacker as any player to play under Nick Saban, and is as dominant as any. When you go back and look in the history of Alabama, he deserves to be in the conversation as the best ever. So as far as most dominant, let me give it this way. As most dominant, I think he's been the most dominant, clear-cut alpha dog in the Nick Saban era. When it comes to alpha dog and what you're talking about, someone who everybody, when they step on the field, when they step in the locker room, absolutely the man, Rolando Mcclain. And I don't know if you heard this or not. Was he from Hoover? Corey Reamer was on with The Game with Ryan Fowler in a flashback, one of those flashback segments, and he talked about when they lost in 2008 to Florida. He said in that locker room, Rolando Mcclain walked into that locker room and said, "Remember what this feels like. And if you're not willing to pay the price to be back here next year, leave now. Don't be a part of the team." Pretty much laid down the gauntlet after a devastating loss where they could have and should have beaten the Florida Gators. And I love it. See, Corey Reamer said Tim Tebow was throwing lights out. He was completing passes that he said he'd never complete again. But either way, Rolando Mcclain walked into that locker room. Think about that, James. Everybody had their head down. He said they were kind of in a defeated mode. And he said, "Remember what this feels like. And we're going to put the work in to be back here next year and finish the job." And I'm paraphrasing. I don't know exact words. But if you don't want to be a part of it and you're not willing to pay the price, now's the time to get out. And, of course, we know that team, the next year, of all of the Nick Saban teams, of all of them, they stand alone in their own category. There's no other team that can touch the 2009 team. And I'm telling you, that part and partial goes to the leadership of Rolando Mcclain. So you have to have him there. And what am I talking about? They are the only undefeated team in the Nick Saban era. Think about that for a second. They didn't have all of these big-time recruits. They didn't have every team since Nick Saban's fourth team, James, after that time, right? From that point on, had at least 3 number one classes. Every team, because, every team since this team has had at least 3 number one classes on their team in terms of recruiting. And they've not been able to get it done. But that group was. And the question is, man, can Nick Saban get another one? I think they're going to do it this year. That's what I've been predicting. But we're going to talk about who can derail him. Well, Rolando Mcclain made sure that no one derailed that 2009 team, and he was an alpha dog. And I think the reason I think he was so powerful, James, is I don't think he just impacted the defensive side of the ball. I think he had impact on the offensive side as well. Now, he's the most dominant, but I don't think he's the most important. I don't think he's the most impactful. Well, I got to go to break. I guess I'm going to have to say that till tomorrow, James. Agree or disagree, Rolando Mcclain, clearly the alpha dog of linebackers. One of the most dominant players as linebacker. But he was not the most impactful. And I think the guy that I'm going to talk about that's the most impactful went a long way to saving Nick Saban's career. Let me paraphrase. Let me correct. Helping Nick Saban remain the dominant defensive coach. that he is. Because there was a little season, I'm teasing you a little bit. There was a little time, there was a little gap there that Nick Saban got caught. And this linebacker showed him something that he took. And because of what this linebacker did, it changed the way Nick Saban recruits and plays that position to this day. And we'll talk about that linebacker and why I think he's the most impactful, and he's definitely in my top 2. And we'll talk about him on tomorrow